Thank you for coming to our student support team presentation on coping with grief and loss. We have a nice size group here in the classroom, and we have a nice growing group online, kind of rapidly increasing in numbers. So thank you all for being here. We always do record these and we'll post them on the IPE website and the Clarkson College Resources YouTube channel. So if you have friends or coworkers who couldn't make it today, have no fear, they can watch this soon as well. My name is Sarah Flanagan. I'm our Director of Community Health and Interprofessional Engagement here at Clarkson College. So the official welcome. Students, if you are looking to use this for an IPE event, just remember that we need to have your reflection in within 90 days. That's 3 months. That's plenty. I would encourage you to do it within a week while everything's still fresh and you're able to have a really high quality reflection. I know that Kristen, who I'll introduce here in a second, has a lot of great information to share with us today. If any of you find yourselves really intrigued by what she's sharing and you want to volunteer, the organization here in town that she's with, Collective for Hope, also known as Grief's Journey, Teddy Bear Hollow, and Healing Embrace, they're always looking for volunteers, whether it's for course credit or not. It's just a nice thing to do as a good human being. And we also do have a death and dying class here at the college that some of you may have taken, other ones maybe not yet. It's called Death and Dying, and it's EA 205, taught by Mrs. Pfeiffer and sometimes myself. So with that, let's go ahead and do our formal introduction here, and then I'll let Kristen take it away. Kristen is with us, as I mentioned, from the Collective for Hope, which is a nice conglomeration of different grief and bereavement resources here for families and individuals in the Omaha metro area. Families drive in for several hours, though, to participate in their free programming. And so we are very grateful to her for being here today to share information with us. And she also has some handouts that we will send out via email to everyone afterwards as well. So with that, the floor is yours. Here is your clicker.
All right. I feel so official with clicker. I love it. Well, thank you for having me. My name is Kristen Erickson. I am a licensed clinical mental health counselor by training and have been in the field for about 25 years, almost 25 years. And about 5, 6, 7 years into working, had decided to go back for a doctoral degree and worked full time, went to my doc program full time and part time, and took me 9 years. So, and if you're working while you're in school, I seriously can appreciate where you're coming from. It's very different to do that. But at the moment, my day job outside of the Collective for Hope contract service work is at Bellevue University. So I teach in their master's program in their clinical mental health counseling. But I am here representing the Collective for Hope. I am their contract service person for what they call Self-Care Saturdays. And so once a month, we have some programming set aside where anybody can come in and during that time, and we just do something self-care related. We usually have some small grief education piece, and then some activities that may or may not tie in with grief or grief work. And that's been really fun to do. I've been doing that since, let's see, February. We usually do it on the 3rd Saturday. If you know anybody, you or anybody you know might be interested in coming, it is free. They just have to sign up. The sign-up's just online. It's a little bit of a pain because you have to answer a whole bunch of questions to sign up. And I remember I signed up just to kind of see what it was like for students or members in the community to sign up. And I thought, gosh, they ask a lot. But talking to them, that's part of their accountability for the programs, and their people who give them funding for programs like this, they can help make it free. And so they use that demographic information as part of their grants or different fundings that they have. But I'm very excited to be here to represent them, and passionate about grief and loss. So it's one of my, it sounds weird, but it's one of my favorite topics. And so I am super excited to be here, and I hope you find something helpful in some way. So one of the things as we get started, grief and loss can bring up some emotions for people. And so if you do feel like something activates or evokes some strong feelings inside and you need to get up and take a break, that we're okay with that. If tears come, we're okay with that. Sometimes that happens, sometimes it doesn't, but I just wanted to give people the heads up on that because we always like to try to normalize talking about grief and loss, including the reactions and the emotions that come with grief and loss. So by chance, anybody willing to say what drew you to this particular presentation? Because grief and loss is probably not one of the more fun presentations. And so I'm just curious, so what drew you and what you hope to get from it? By chance, 2 or 3 people might be willing to share.
Hi, my name is Shane. I'm over Zoom. I don't know if you guys can hear me.
A little bit.
Are you able? My mother passed away last year in November, so recently it was like her death anniversary 1 year mark on November 2nd. And so this kind of drew me in just because like this is relevant to my life. I have taken the death and dying course and I did find that to be beneficial. But I also haven't attended an event for I don't know actually what it's called. We have to complete modules and then we have to get these credits for our program. And so this is my first time, so I'm kind of just curious to see what it's like. But again, I just think that this is really relevant. So I'm curious to see what information you present today.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for feeling comfortable enough to share about your own loss and the anniversary of that. I really sincerely appreciate that. And do hope that you find something helpful today on that personal level, not just that professional level. By chance, anybody else willing to share?
Hi, I'm Christina. I'm on Zoom. Can you guys hear me? Hello?
Okay,
I-
think we can hear
yes.
you. Can people hear okay?
Yes.
Okay.
Hi. Okay, so I'm Christina, and I'm actually a part of the BSN program, the Bachelor of Science in Nursing. And I just took part in this IPE credit because I feel like, death and dying and grief and loss is very universal, especially when it comes to healthcare. So just being, very knowledgeable and feeling for these people and patients who do experience a loss, it's really good to be pretty aware, kind of, what they could be feeling, or at least kind of being, in a place where you can possibly understand, kind of like their emotions and what's going on. So yeah, it's a good IPE choice.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And what you say is huge because it clearly is something in the healthcare field that everyone will encounter. It's not if, it's a when kind of thing. And so being able to learn some basics, I think is really helpful. This particular presentation, I will cover some basics. I won't cover them quite the same way I would if it was like a grief 101 kind of presentation versus like a coping, but I do want to have some basic background information that can be helpful and talk about some resources, some of the handouts that I have some additional handouts I came across that I'm like, I totally want to share these. And so Rachel or Sarah will be passing those along as well. So I am a kind of presenter who I love hands-on stuff, but I understand that that's not typically how you do things here in this presentation, especially while you're eating lunch. And so it'll be a little bit more of a luxury kind of style thing, which is not as common for me. So if I ever seem awkward up here, that is most likely where that is coming from. But I do hope you walk away with something meaningful, not just professionally, but also personally. So I always think it's important to let people know what my lens is when I do presentations. My background I mentioned as a clinical counselor, and I am very existential oriented. And so I have kind of a slew of things here that, what the heck does that mean to be very existential oriented? I also am very holistic with how I do things. I have a strange background. I have a bachelor's and a master's in music. And when I was working on my master's in music, I was thinking, I came across the field of biofeedback and mind body work. And so they didn't have a degree at that time. And so I did, for the music part, I emphasized how music could be used for stress reduction and anxiety reduction. And went into hospitals and created a hospital arts program where we played for patients. That was really powerful experience. But while I was doing that, my main thing was really trying to also do this side certification. My professor said, hey, I want to get certified in biofeedback. Do you want to come do it? I'm like, sure. And we had a blast being able to do that. My first job out of my that master's program was working for a neurologist for gosh, probably chronic pain clinic is where I had worked, and I worked in 2 different chronic pain clinics, and then I had worked for a nurse who had a private practice. She's a nurse practitioner, and so for about 5 years did that work with patients, and our patients came in wearing gowns, and for biofeedback, when it's more clinical, they do that. If you use it more for stress reduction oriented stuff, then they don't typically do that. And so the settings I was in, we very much did that. And then I went back to school for a master's in counseling and have been doing that ever since. But the existential lens is very much about meaning making. Death or dying is a huge part of existential counseling, and they often will talk about a non-being aspect, and non-being doesn't mean more of like we cease to exist. It's kind of like, how can we use death and dying as a motivator to live life more fully? Like, this is the life that we have to live in, and how can we do that? And so that's a huge part of just who I am as a person. And so is the biofeedback holistic type of thinking. And you'll see some of that indirectly come out here. The other thing I had wanted to say as far as my lens is the importance of relationship and the power of connection. My internship back in the 90s, I had a couple of them. One was in a prison setting, but one of them was in hospice. And I just fell in love with grief and loss counseling at that time. But I'll never forget my first client who came in, who's he was about 30. His wife was about 28, who had died of breast cancer. And it had been about a year since the loss, probably somewhere between about 10 months and a year. And he had everything out on the nightstand and in the bedroom, and the exact same as the night she had passed away. The book was open on the same page she was reading. And thankfully, I knew enough about grief and loss counseling to not say something like, this guy is stuck in his grief. Because I at least knew enough to not do that. But it was then at that moment that I realized as a counselor that I couldn't actually do anything to change the situation. A lot of the other types of issues we have, you know, with depression and anxiety and PTSD, some other things, that there's so many things that we can do with individuals that is just so amazing and powerful and can make such a huge, profound difference. And then here I'm like, oh my gosh, I can't change a thing. And it was then that I realized the beauty and power of being with people who are mourning losses. We are not a society that does well with sitting with grief and loss topics. One of my counselors, when I was over at training clinic and I was behind the one-way mirror watching our student, her client had come in and said, the doctor's given me about 6 months to live. I'm trying to talk to my spouse about it, but he honestly doesn't want to talk about it. So I want to come in and talk to you. Because I have a lot I need to work through before I die. And my student, bless her heart, she could not say the word death or dying. And And you could see the person was incredibly patient with her, because most of them are, if they are willing to work with students in their master's program while they gain their skills and stuff. But in our practicum class, we did tons of role plays, just having her practice saying the words death and dying. And we'd have a student role play her client, and we're like, how did that work? And I remember he was like, are you kidding? She can't even say it. I'm not going to talk to her. She can't even acknowledge this. And she's scared stiff. Why would I talk to her? And we're just not always a society that deals well with death and dying. In the medical field, I do think that people tend to deal with it a little bit better, because if you didn't, you most likely would be picking a different profession, just like people who maybe they're afraid of blood, they probably wouldn't go into the medical profession. And so it still doesn't mean that people are comfortable with death or dying or talking about it. But we do hope that people can feel comfortable talking about it, because it can be so powerful when somebody is in the process of dying, to be able to help them mourn their losses and say goodbye to this life, and work through whatever they feel they need to work through before they pass away. And what a powerful experience that is. And for family members to have the courage to be able to say their goodbyes and to be able to have that support. So when my mother had passed away 30 years ago, the hospice nurse was amazing with that. She would come in and she would say, okay, here's what's going on with your mom, and here's what we think the trajectory is. And then she'd come in and she'd say, oh, it's getting closer. If you want to say your goodbyes, now is your time to say your goodbyes. And I appreciated so much that it was just normalized to talk about. I come from a very large family. Some of my siblings did not want to say their goodbyes. And my brother, he's a nurse now, but at that time was not, and he just couldn't be around my mom. He couldn't handle seeing her suffer so much. And then one of my other sisters was like, Mom, you're not going to die. You're not going to die. And I just looked at my sister, and I seriously wanted to say I did not, but I'm like, are you serious? Where have you been? The doctor said she has about 3 weeks before she dies. Mom said, can you get everybody together so I can have people here when I died, like everybody here? And I'm like, did you miss our conversation? So I did handle that with more grace with my sister, because everybody does mourn it differently. But it was a beautiful opportunity that hospice nurse gave us to be able to help us know the signs and things to look for, but also to invite those conversations. And I will still never forget that conversation that I had with my mom, and how powerful that was for me, with being able to say those goodbyes. Anyways, coming back to the grief and loss word, we really do want that to be more about being. One of the things that translates into, I think, for medical professionals is to not dismiss or act like you have to just scurry from room to room to room to room, because that doesn't exactly send the message that you're okay to talk. And it's hard when you have so many patients. My other sister's who are a nurse, and she's in a different setting now, but for a while she was in an assisted living center. And I think she said she had 50 patients on her load at that same time. And she's like, there's no way I could just get to them all. There's just no way. She was always just so stressed with her load. And then she decided to change professions and just do private nursing one-on-one, and she loves it. But it's hard to be there when people are so busy. And that's hard, because how do you balance that with all the other stuff that you have to do, or even know that there's a need to do it? And if you can't, try to find somebody who can, because there's usually somebody who can come do that, if you can't. The last thing I want to say about my life is I'm a huge fan, and I say the word sacred. I don't necessarily mean this in like a religious context, so I'm hoping that I'm not imposing values or anything by saying that. That's not my intent. By saying that is just that what we do in my eyes, it is a sacred kind of moment and a very tender moment with people, that one-on-one process of working with people when they are dying or working with family members afterwards. But this is, even though I'm talking a lot about death and dying, there's a lot of grief and loss that is not death and dying. And we still want to hold that space. There are so many multiple dimensions and intersectionalities and different things that we might know this much about, and it'd be great if we knew this much, but we don't know much. We're not the expert, they are, and I hope that we do enter with grace, empathy, and great cultural humility when we address and talk about grief and loss, and be there with people while they're mourning their losses. I wanted to just make a quick comment about monumental overload is an understandable understatement when it comes to what we've all been through with COVID. It's like, I think the healthcare profession has been so heavily impacted by that. And you can probably always all think back to where you were at that time when they announced, and if you were a student or not, and what that was like for people, and people who are like, I can't do this, I'm out of here with their professions. But there are a lot of people who were struggling, but lots of mass trauma, people are dying by themselves. I remember a friend of mine who had passed away, a dear friend, and I could not go to her funeral. That was early on in COVID, and before they thought of the, let's do Zoom funerals and things like that. And there's just so much going on, and lots of trauma, in addition to just anything that was going on in the nation, a lot of political unrest, and some really unfortunate and disheartening things culturally as well. So there were lots of levels of loss and layers of loss and secondary loss. And we are going to see more and more of that impact over the next couple of years in the mental health field. They really do believe that we'll probably see a surge of some of the trauma impact, as well as the grief and loss and the combination thereof, and some really high needs. And they're already seeing that. Some of the APA, the American Psychological Association, and some of the research they're seeing, they're definitely seeing that spike. So when I think of it, it reminds me of this picture here, that this is probably what it's been like for a lot of people. And even if it hasn't been COVID related, there are times where we do feel this way, whether it's about loss or something else. When I first saw this picture, and this will date me, but it was kind of like pre-social media, where they were passing things along on the internet a lot. And I just remember actually being pretty judgmental about it, going, what the freaking heck are they doing? They should like get a truck. They should have the proper tools. They should know better. The back tire looks like it's gonna explode. And then the more I really studied this picture and looked at it, the more I looked at the person inside, the more I looked at the twine combination, the more I looked at, oh my gosh, maybe they didn't have the resources to be able to, as my ex, who was a general contractor, would always say, have the right tool for the right job. And the YouTube clip here is of Mythbusters, who were trying to see if this actually is plausible. And they were nervous doing this. They built in all sorts of reinforcements in the car. And what they found out is that, yes, you can do this. It's just, you can't do it or sustain it for very long. And when I think about that for our lives, with the heavy levels of stress that we go through in our everyday lives, it's hard for us to sustain this heavy weight. But what happens with grief and loss is this is what you're carrying around oftentimes with grief and loss. Now kids mourn differently, grieve differently, and so they grieve in spurts, and they grieve developmentally. And so when new developmental milestones hit, you'll see some new grieving aspects come up for kids. But for adults, it does tend to be that more kind of heavy, steady blast, and then over time tends to lessen a little bit with some grief bursts that are incredibly unexpected and overwhelm people as well, that is kind of a little bit more of what we might see for adults. But we're still learning a lot about grief and loss, and there's still lots of research being done in the grief and loss field. And so we'll probably be learning more and more as we go. But this heavy feeling really does suck when it comes, and it feels so incredibly overwhelming. And being a grief loss kind of counselor person, where this is, you know, somewhat of a specialty area for me, well, is a specialty area for me. I've been through a lot of loss, but every single time a new loss comes up for me, I'm like, dang it, I wish I didn't know as much as I knew about grief and loss, because it almost feels like it impacts how I mourn in some ways, because I can't take away that mourning process is still going to happen. And it's just like, I wish I could just mourn normally in some ways. Although on the other hand, I am grateful to know that a lot of things are normal. Nothing feels normal. And so in our field, we try to say that it's more common instead of normal, because nothing feels normal. So even though it is common. So I want to pause for a minute and see if anybody resonates with anything there that we just talked about that you might want to share. And if not, that's all right. We'll keep moving on. Okie dokie, let's keep moving on. So I want to, this is probably more of that psychophysiological side of me. I really do think there's a trauma aspect to grief and loss, especially if it's a traumatic loss. But even when it's not, there often is that, you know, I can't believe this is happening to me kind of feeling that can be really stressful. And so I kind of like to see this as we all have this range we cope well in. And if we stay in that range, we're pretty good. But when it goes out of that range, what often happens with grief and loss, when it goes out, it doesn't all the time for grief and loss, but when it does, it really is something that we don't feel ourselves. And it just kind of feels surreal at times, like you're going through the motions. It's really hard to concentrate. And really a lot of the stress response kind of, you know, fight, flight, freeze kind of reactions that are going on for people. And that when you're out of that range, it feels really uncomfortable. And if it happens day in, day out, which is not uncommon, especially when there's people who have estate issues, or there's family drama issues, or arguments over different things, you know, not letting family members mourn differently, or things like that. It really can be overwhelming. And this can happen in our regular lives, even if it is nothing grief and loss related. It's sucky, but then over time that shrinks, our baseline shifts, and it just doesn't feel like we have any room to work with it at all. And it's, you know, when I see this happen, that's when I see people pretty hopeless, pretty helpless kind of feeling, and not sure what to do or where to get help. It can be pretty exhausting, that living a day at a time. So if you're used to thinking a month or two ahead, that's not going to happen. For people, that's really hard at this kind of state. So I see this a little bit more of like almost like a crisis state. And in our field, we use different skills for crisis than we do for counseling. And so that's something I just wanted people to be aware of, because it really is like you're living a state of distress. It's almost like this cat is walking around like this all the time. And so I just want people to be aware of that. And if you're interested in any of the traumatic studies or anything, there's some wonderful work by Bessel van der Kolk and Stephen Porges, Peter Levine. There's actually quite a few people in the mental health field who are addressing some of these issues. Ideally, what we're doing is we're opening that space back up. We're trying to build some skills that will help us, so we're not getting up there in the first place. Or if we do, that we're able to bring it back down in a reasonable time, and help us feel more centered and grounded. That is not always what happens with grief and loss, because what often happens for grief and loss is this. And then you're up here for quite some time before you come down. But the more we're aware of this and we work towards that, I'd like to think that that can be helpful for our coping skills in general. So I'm a huge fan of trying to increase awareness, so we are aware of those first signs of stress and just the need to be able to take time out for ourselves, whatever that looks like, because everybody, what works for one person is not the same of what works for another. So just a couple tips here. We're not going to spend tons of time on this piece of things, but I do want to mention it. I think self-compassion is a really huge one. If you're interested in this, Kristen and Stephen, Christopher Germer, they have some wonderful books and workbooks, but they also have some great internet resources that you can look up on YouTube about self-compassion. We're not great at meeting where we're at. Who doesn't want to be in a better place? Who doesn't want to move forward fast? We're kind of a fast food society, and I think we sometimes try to do grief fast food. Sometimes I think we're trying to live our lives in a fast food kind of way, and sometimes we can do that, but a lot of times we can't. And I hope we're exercising some kindness about that towards ourselves and other people as well, especially if like two family members could be very different. And so, like I mentioned, my sister, and I had to be very, very patient with her when she responded very differently with my mom passing away, thinking like, oh my gosh, she wasn't supposed to die. She was supposed to be here much longer. And how did I know? And I was like, yeah, it's only obvious. And I didn't tell her that. That would not have been very compassionate. But also, if I were her, I would not want people to do that as well. But hopefully we're being not only compassionate with other people, but compassionate with ourselves. The increasing awareness, there's so many things that people can do to help increase that awareness. Changing the stressful situation, you can't change death or dying. Aspects, but you can, if there are some things that you can change about that. My dad had passed away this summer, and the hospice facility he was in, I was very fortunate for the hospice facility I did my my internship in many, many years ago, that I knew what it should be like. And it was very interesting watching what he was doing. But so for us, changing the stressful situation wasn't getting him out of there, but it was trying to work more closely with the staff to be able to make sure that if there's things that we felt we would like to see happen there, to be able to try to see if they could happen there. Like, for example, they lost his glasses and they never found them. But we had, you know, continually asked them if they could look for them. They never found them. Fortunately, about a week later, we did find some backup glasses, and so we brought those. But you know, in those situations, it might be more advocacy. And as a healthcare professional, for the things you're struggling with, it might be advocating for yourself. If you need some time off, I remember when I had some miscarriage losses, and the doctor office, the doctor called me at my work, and I was pregnant with triplets, and I was really hoping the last one made it, because it was the first two were very obvious that was a miscarriage. The last one was not. And so when I got those blood levels back, she had called me at work, and she was, I could see she was trying to be kind, but not the most compassionate as she could be. But I got off the phone and I just started sobbing. And I'm just like, oh crap, I'm supposed to be seeing clients. So for me, that changed the stressful situation, and self-compassion was to call in my front desk person and say, I'm going to need to cancel my clients and reschedule them, and I need some time. That was what I did in that situation. So I hope we can see that not everybody can, you know, cancel work, that kind of stuff, but if we can find things that help us in that moment, so we can honor the things that are coming up for us, it can be helpful. Changing perception of the situation is a tough one, because sometimes people say some really awful things when people are mourning losses. Sometimes it can be well, you're the one who wanted the divorce, so why are you so stressed and overwhelmed with that? And always talk about how it's just so different, and it's been such a huge loss for you, which is not the nicest thing for people to say. Sometimes when my mom passed away, I remember I was in my master's program, and I remember telling my dear friend who had heard all the process of her dying with cancer. And so when I said, yeah, my mom died last night, and it's kind of surreal being here at school, but I have a test, so here, and this will be interesting. And my friend said, gosh, I'm sorry about your mom. And then she said, well, are you ready for the test? And then she just quickly went on to all this test stuff. And I'm just like, did she even hear me? And so it is hard to change the perception of situations when you're hearing stuff like that. Or there was one gal who had come over. She had, I had known her from my church, and she was just trying to, she's in a little bit more of a leadership role kind of thing. And so she's checking in on me, and she listened so well. And then all of a sudden, after about 10 minutes, she sits upright and she goes, no, I can't relate at all. My sister died differently. And I have to admit, in my mind, I felt like saying, what the freaking heck are you doing here then? And I didn't. I was very kind. And I just said, well, everybody mourns a little differently. And it sounds like you had a different relationship with your sister. And so that's understandable. People are going to have some different experiences. So it's just really, really nice about it. But I had to work hard to change that situation, perception of that situation, so I didn't let that impact me, because sometimes people really do say some insensitive things. Please don't be that person who does, and if you do, own it. And you can't take away what you did, but you can try to help. Try to look for some skills. This top one, you'll see lots of different ideas: yoga, music, movement. All of these things up there actually do have some research even to be able to support them, that they can be helpful depending on what it is and what you're doing with it. But we really do want to help you try to feel like you have some coping skills, because when you feel like you have coping skills, you feel like you at least can be proactive instead of reactive, or feel like things are happening to you. And instead of being able to say this happened and this sucked, but there are some things that I can do to still cope with this, even though it sucks. The taking positive action to seek help is a hard one. I love that they emphasize motivational interval skills, not just in counseling area, my line of work, but also in a medical field. And sometimes I think we have to draw upon those things to remind us that it is okay to seek help. I don't know how many people have read Stephen Covey's work, but I'm a huge fan of that. Sharpen the saw concept as many times as you need to. So that's you can be in a pretty good state, but keep doing some self-care things that will help you stay in a good state. And then this last one here, Muscles of the Soul from Brian Luke Seward. I taught stress management for 12 years and used his textbook for quite some time. And he has this concept he calls muscles of the soul, and I love it. He said he interviewed so many people who have been through some pretty horrific things in life. And he said when he would always ask them how they made it through, he said the biggest thing that he would hear over and over and over again was things like inner strength, courage, resiliency, kind of those intangible things that are hard to put words on. And you just have to dig deep, and he calls them muscles of the soul. And I love that terminology. What I want to do for pause point is just see if anybody has any questions at this point, and then we're going to pop into a whole bunch of whatever we have time for with coping strategies, more coping, particularly with grief and loss. Okay, so let's move forward. So I think one thing with grief and loss is to educate yourself, learn more about it. You have a course here. I love that you have a course because each loss is unique and each experience is unique. Each relationship is unique. The miscarriage loss I had with the triplets, when I had another miscarriage loss a couple years later, it was very different experience and different loss. In fact, that one was pretty traumatic, and I don't talk about that very much with a lot of people because it was pretty traumatic for me, where the other one I had a relatively good experience with. And so when I talk, I'll often talk about that experience with it. Loss is cumulative. So if you see yourself revisiting old losses, that is not uncommon. Intangible losses can be really hard to deal with. So that's Pauline's boss's work on ambiguous type of losses. And so if there's like, say, no body found or something like that, that can be a really hard thing for people to mourn. Miscarriage losses fit in that. Infertility fits in that. Disenfranchised losses, there's loss that isn't acknowledged, or the way people grieve or mourn isn't acknowledged. It has a stigma associated with it. Disenfranchised grief is actually, if all the areas of grief would be what I would call my specialty area within grief, and something I'm very passionate about. But learn more about that and be aware of it, so you're not that person who dismisses those losses, because it's very easy to dismiss it if you're not careful. I'm not going to go through a ton of these, the rest of these, but do when you get the PowerPoint, do look them over. If you have questions, pop me an email, or you have awesome staff members who, faculty members who teach, who can fill you in on some of these kinds of things that are on here. The grief reactions, you're probably all familiar with some of those reactions, but I think that one that I wanted to mention in particular is I don't think I think people are always caught off guard with how exhausting grief is, just physically exhausting, and also the difficulty concentrating. Those are like some of the emotional stuff people can understand, but sometimes people really struggle with that physical exhaustion, and how it impacts people on that level. We kind of talked about ambiguous loss, a little bit about disenfranchised loss. Here's a couple examples if it is helpful to know. My pet, my first child, is in the process of dying. My cat's kind of on kitty hospice, I guess you could say. So I'm working very closely with my vet office of, is it time? And it's been hard because they gave me the news over the weekend, and I just sobbed all weekend. But I remember trying to talk to somebody about it. I'm like, how can I tell them that I'm like, so overwhelmed with my cat dying that you just, people just look at you strange. And so I'm like, I think I'm gonna have to be careful how I word this with people and call my friends who get it. But please be aware, because it is something that is really hard when people go through, they feel so alone in the process. The grief and loss series, I'd love to mention lots of those grief loss theories, but due to time, I'm only going to mention one, and that's this dual process model. And there's a couple different ways that you can kind of explain this, but I think it's really helpful to know from an educational perspective, because people will bounce back and forth with this loss oriented and doing the grief work and wanting to really be there and remember that person and honor that person. And sometimes the intrusion of grief, sometimes things come, whether or not reminders of like, yeah, you're still mourning. And then that restoration orientation, which is kind of more that almost wanting to move forward. And as you do that, then you like pop back into this, no, I need to remember this person, and I don't want to forget them. And but then when you're here, it's just so exhausting, you can't stay there. And so it's like this really popping back and forth. There's several different ways you can kind of explain this, some more subtle nuances to it. But I mentioned that because if you see yourself doing that, it's normal, given the situation. And so so you can kind of watch for that. There are a lot of other theories, but I just wanted to briefly mention that one. And the giving voice, let's see, think about your own losses, how they've impacted you. I think that's really huge, because when you work with other people, you want to be able to help them. But if you have had a hard time acknowledging your own loss, you're going to have a hard time helping other people. So I'm a huge fan of the working through your own loss. So that's what the rest of what we're going to do is talk about some of the things that you can do. So I'm going to we're going to talk about several things. One of them, the grief timeline. If you have not done one of these before, you don't have to do this now, but look through the timeline and fill it out and pay attention to what comes up for you. I know when I did this, I was shocked how much loss I had. That was overwhelming for me to look at, but it was also powerful because it was a way to like, okay, yeah, no wonder I'm like struggling with some of the loss and have these waves. There's a grief goodbye letter. There's different theories, continuous bonds, and sometimes, you know, the goodbye letter isn't the best way for people. You can tweak the wording on this to whatever fits for you, but there are sometimes people didn't get a chance to say goodbye to that person before they passed away. This can be really powerful for that. The taking care of yourself while grieving handout has lots of different things, even just from basics like sleep and nutrition kinds of things on there. I did bring some, if you like more writing, there is like journals that are guided prompts that can help people when they are coping with their losses. This one is kind of fun. They're lists of bravery. When we are mourning losses, it takes so much energy. You may not have time to read a book, but these are just like a page or two. And same with the grief one. Gratitude journals can be helpful as well. You may not be grateful for the loss per se, but maybe that's grateful for the memories and experiences that you've had and the things you've learned from that, whether that's a death loss or a non-death loss. If it's grief and loss, death loss, these books, Tear Soup and When Dinosaurs Die, are really wonderful. This is a great one for educating kids. This is a really good one for kids and adults, but it weaves in some beautiful education about grief and loss, and they're small and easy. So if you are wrestling with wanting to read a book, but you're like, no way, I don't have time, I would recommend something like that. This is a self-care planner. There's plenty of these you can find. Same thing. These are just one pagers that you could look at. Couple other things. Music is wonderful. Pull out some music. Sometimes people like listening to music that if it's a death loss of that, like music that person loved, sometimes that's not as comforting as just listening to your favorite music or soothing music or peaceful music. There's a writing activity that you can do if you're ever feeling stuck. This is a wonderful one. Or if you ever feel like you want to tune into your emotions and you just do a free write. And after a few minutes, you stop, you circle what you wrote, you go back, you look at that, and then you write more and do it again 3 or 4 times. And it often takes people to a little bit deeper level in it, and it can help you with that unstuck. And so this is a really good self-care thing you can do. I love Dear Self letters, Dear Self, and then you write a prompt like, Dear Self, what I need today. And then you just write yourself a letter, or Dear Self, grief sucks. Let me tell you why. So you're just getting out what it is. It's designed for you. I suggest going back and reading it, but you don't have to. You can just tear it up afterwards. But there's some value to doing an activity like that. Not for everybody, and it can be emotional, but I also hear over and over and over how helpful it's been. Tried it out myself, love it as well. The goodbye letters we mentioned can be helpful. I wanted to touch on a couple more, and then we're probably getting closer to time, but drawings are something I love. I'm not an artist, but I love pastel chalk drawings, and I like them because they're messy, and grief and loss is messy. So if I can even kind of learn how to manage something with that process, I get little teeny notebooks to do this that are this size, 4 by 6, because I just don't have time for other things or bigger things. And then I'll sometimes write, sometimes I don't. After the miscarriage loss, I'm trying to make sense of that miscarriage loss. And so this is one of mine. This one went with this one here on the flip side. That's what this was, because I was trying to make sense of it all. And that was powerful for me to be able to do, but sometimes I only had strength to just do the drawing, and I'm a huge fan that what needs to come out will come out. So I was obsessed with teardrops of blood, which makes sense for miscarriage loss. And I have tons of those pictures and my little notebook. And the cool thing, I get those little things you can tear out because I'm perfectionist kind of oriented. So I just tear them out if I didn't like how it turned out and just throw it away. So the first couple of notebooks I had ended up being about this big, even though they started bigger. But if you're an artsy kind of person, or you just want an outlet that you don't have to even share what it means to anybody else, you know what it is, but they don't, I would encourage you to try something like that. Another one with that would be the, there's a mandala activity you can do. This one is here. You draw 4 quadrants, and you can actually do this in many, many different ways. But here's one that I did also with the pastel. You can do it with markers, you can do it with stickers, you can do it with whatever. You can keep it, you can chuck it. I was at a workshop recently that we were doing a retreat, and there were 4 of us who were facilitating. So the other 2 are facilitating. And so my colleague and I were like, let's do it too. And it was really powerful. And so there's different ways that you can do it. It doesn't always have to be loss oriented. But if you did do it loss oriented, it's like, you know, where were you in the past? And so I kind of look at that at the time of the loss, what kinds of things happened. So you're working on processing that, because sometimes people forget to process those basics. And then where are you now? Where do you want to be? And what will help you get there? And the beauty is you can do a whole bunch of symbols. Nobody even has to know what they are all about. And then you can tweak it however you want. And you can decide which quadrant you want to start in as well. So I did want to show that. So you have some variety of some things you can do. I mentioned the books, and I mentioned some of the handouts. I even have some more handouts for you. And the only other thing I'd probably recommend, that this comes with that muscles of the soul, is really to try to reflect on those, the worst things that you have been through, those painful grief bursts and the waves, and really to try to see what helped you get through that, to remind you that you are stronger than you give yourself credit for, and to be able to just really reflect and honor that. The only last thing I wanted to mention as far as self-care pieces is really to also reflect on what replenishes you. So how do you nurture that heart space and when things get low or challenging for you? In my line of work, I hear a lot of heavy stuff, and some pretty painful stuff at times. And so it's really important for me to be able to be there for my clients. And so I do a ton of self-care work, because if I didn't, I don't think I'd be able to do the work that I do on a daily basis. And especially when I hear some pretty horrific things. Not everybody comes in for horrific things, but there are people who have really been through some tough things that I feel for them, and my heart just breaks for them and what they've been through. But I want to be able to help hold space for that, so they can talk about it and talk about that openly, and feel like I can sit there with them in that and help them. But replenishing, that's going to look different for everybody. I'm a funny duck. Around my house, I have little teeny things everywhere I turn that just remind me of self-care. Sometimes I even do this. You won't be able to see this. This is the necklace. Sometimes I wear this necklace. Inside it is recycled tire. And I love that, because I'm like, no way. Who would have thought of turning recycled tire into a cool necklace? If you look real close at it, it looks like it might be alligator or crocodile. And I just never would have pictured recycled tire being really super cool. So sometimes I'll even wear stuff that just kind of reminds me of transformation can happen through some pretty awful, difficult things, whether that is death loss related or other types of losses that we have been through. On that note, that's a lot of information, but I'm pretty much done with the main things that I did want to cover, outside of one last thing that I will leave with you. But did anybody have any questions, thoughts, or comments, or anybody want to share things they've done that they found especially helpful, or anything else on your mind related to the topic of the day?
I appreciate how you said everybody kind of grieves differently. Today is my father-in-law's birthday, and he passed away 3 years ago. So it's a kind of a crazy day for me today, I feel. But when my husband and I were very mournful and wanted to kind of grieve that loss, whereas my mother-in-law started giving away all of the stuff right away. And we were just like, oh my gosh, like, how could you do that? Where now looking back, you know, that's how she was grieving. You know, she just needed to be like, give his stuff to someone that would be meaningful to her, or to to them. So it just, I appreciated when you said that everybody kind of grieves differently. It's so true.
It is hard to watch. Like, I know when my dad had passed away, you know, my dad's wife, my dad remarried after my mom passed away, but so we don't really call her our stepmom kind of thing, but I guess technically she is. But she was doing the same thing, just kind of giving everything away, and we're just like, really? But we noticed when he was declining, we noticed whenever he was at his worst, she would bolt. She was gone, and us kids were just like, what the heck, when he needs you most? But it finally occurred to us that she doesn't want to be there when he dies. And when that occurred to us, then her behaviors made sense. And then it reached a point where he did go into an assisted living center, and he hung on there until she came. He waited and waited and waited, and my sister's like to, you know, Barbara, you gotta come down here because he's not gonna go until you come. And sure enough, after she came, a couple hours later, he passed away. He was waiting. But yeah, she did not want to be there. And it was hard for us kids, and we just had to like, nope, that's how she's working through it. If we were in her position, we wouldn't want to be criticized for that. But it was hard. But thank you for sharing that. And when you mentioned anniversaries, and that had come up before with person who had shared about their loss as well. Anniversaries are hard. You want to be able to give yourself permission to be able to plan if you want to, but also change all your plans if you want to, and maybe think about if there's something special you want to do that day, or if you want to crawl in your cave and hibernate and do some good self-care that way. That's all okay. It doesn't feel okay, but it is. And you can be the person who decides that.
We just wanted to thank you for that reminder of self-care around the house. She liked that idea from the chat.
Oh, thanks. You know, during COVID, especially when there was some pretty horrific things happening from a cultural perspective, that it would just break my heart when I turn on the news and I'm like, oh my gosh, how are people so mean? They suck and this shouldn't be happening in, you know, our world. And I was just so disheartened. And what I did, I took out some cardstock and I drew on the cardstock little hearts about this big. So it was heart. There were like about 8 on a page. And I just drew them with markers and I colored them like, we need more love in this world. We need more love in this world. And I seriously drew about 300, and slowly the we need more love kind of changed to there's a lot of loving, caring people. Even though there's a lot of mean people, there's a lot of loving, caring people. And then it was like, let's be that loving, caring person and make a difference in our world. And then I put them all on my kitchen table, and I love flowers, fresh flowers. That's one of the things I do for my self-care as well. And so I put all the hearts around there. And after about a month, I'm like, I should do something with these hearts. So then I started mailing them to people, and I just said, hey, and I explained why I did them. And I said, I hope you find this meaningful. If you think it's dorky, please pass it on to somebody who might. The next thing I know, I'm getting all these cards from people and photos from people of where they put their hearts and what they did with them. And I'm just like, aw, and it was super cool to do something like that. But that was part of my spontaneous, we need more love in this world, and I need to see that love. I need to feel it, and I want to keep that love within myself. And so I'm kind of known to do all sorts of little things like that I'm sure other people might think are strange, but that's part of my do things around the house kind of stuff, and have things wherever I look that there's something that is self-care related.
Another comment from online. I like that you made the comment about feeling like you cannot grieve like everyone else because we're in healthcare, and she felt this way because of her grandfather's passing. Everyone expected her to answer the medical questions when she just wanted to be grieving. So
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. It is something that it's hard because people do look for you for those answers, and in my field as well, but I think especially in more direct medical care like all of you will be doing, and that's hard. And then a lot of times people in medical field are pretty hardy towards tolerating, I guess that's not my preferred word to use, but for lack of better words, tolerating high levels of loss, meaning you, kind of like what I was saying, you probably wouldn't be in this field if you weren't able to do that. But then every now and then something hits you hard, and then people look at you like, what's wrong with you? Like, why would this bother you? But we're human, and that's going to happen at some point in time. We're going to be touched by people and the things that they go through and they experience, and the types of losses that they have. I mean, gosh, I remember a gal who'd come in to see me. She was having a hard time dating. She was about 22, and she says, I know this has to do with the abuse and kidnapping when I was 5. And she was left on the side of the road after they abused her in Idaho by a payphone. Back then they had the payphones, and thankfully they didn't kill her. They left her there where she could, and gave her quarters where she could call. But she had this huge loss of what happened as an adult. She didn't know. And she kept asking her family for details, and they would not tell her. They did not want her to be re-traumatized, but they didn't realize they were traumatizing her more by not knowing that information. So when she'd come to see me, she's like, there's this huge loss, and I know it's impacting me. I know it's impacting my dating. I don't know what to do about this. And I said, well, what information do you feel you need? And is there anybody in your family who you feel you can get that from, if that's what you feel you need? And she said, my grandmother. She went to her grandmother, and her grandmother had scrapbooks, big, thick, of all the court proceedings, of all the articles, newspaper articles, because it was pretty blasted all over, and for an extensive amount of time. She said she read through everything, and it was just what she needed to go to the next level, that she didn't feel she needed to revisit again. Because that would be more of those intangible kind of losses. She knew it was loss, a type of loss. She just didn't know how to put that in words and why it was important to her. But it was. And then when she went through that, she didn't necessarily feel the need to revisit it. And we worked on other areas of to be able to move forward. We don't get over loss. We just work through it. Loss changes over time, and we move forward. So that would be another one. If I were to give you a tip, please never tell anybody to, aren't you over it yet? I remember a cousin came to me and she said, oh my gosh, my friend is pregnant again, and she's not happy. I don't know why she's not happy. And she had a miscarriage loss, and she's been wanting to get pregnant so much, so bad. And now she's pregnant, she's not happy. And I said, oh my gosh, Natalie, whatever you do, do not tell her that at least she's pregnant again. She said, I did. She says, is that bad? And I'm like, yeah, you can't replace a child. And she's like, I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry. I just wanted her to be happy. So sometimes people mean well, but those are losses that we don't always think about. And I hope that we can start thinking about them more, so we are more sensitive to some of those things that we didn't know we needed to be sensitive about. Anybody else have any other thoughts or comments?
Yeah, one last thing I was thinking of too, for everybody, whether you're employees or students who are listening today, everybody here is in a giving profession, a helping profession, a caring profession. And you're right. I mean, you see a lot, you experience a lot, but that adds up underneath. And sometimes when you hit that limit, it doesn't even make sense. You're like, that wasn't even a big deal, but it put me over. And so one thing I learned a long time ago when I worked for over 10 years in the grief and loss world before I came here to Clarkson, was how to have like little rituals to release that every day, even if you didn't think you needed it. So like what I would encourage you guys to do, students on the call or in the room, is think about what's something you can do every day when you leave your shift. Maybe it's the car ride home, you listen to music, or you have no music, or you roll down the windows. Maybe it's when you get home, there's something that you're going to do every day to have that ritual to kind of release and let go. When I worked at Teddy Bear Hollow, I had to figure out a way to kind of let go of other people's problems, because you hear a lot and you take on a lot. And so what worked for me was I'm not condoning this if you're not over 21, but I would take a hot shower and I would wash my hair, and I would visualize that I was rinsing out other people's heavy stuff. So I didn't go to bed with it. I didn't do it every day, but if I had a hard day. And then the other thing that I would do at the same time, for me, it was a temperature contrast. I would have the water as hot as I could stand it, and then I would have a sip of cold beer. I wouldn't drink the whole beer. I wouldn't have 6 beers. I'd have maybe just 1 or 2. But for me, that contrast, you could do it with lemonade or iced tea, whatever. But to have some kind of a release for yourself, because if you don't do something, you're gonna take it home to your friends and family and you won't even know it.
Yep, and they'll feel it and they'll can tell that you are distracted and a little bit preoccupied. Because people will feel it. In our line of work, there's a wonderful book called Leave It at the Office. And I don't know if they have those in healthcare, like medical kind of side of things. But I remember a good friend of mine, she said that she tried to just imagine the things that were going on in like a old typical file cabinet where you open it, you put all the files in and then you close it. And she'd say that was her end of office ritual that she would do, leave it at the office, kind of imagery exercise. I'm a huge fan of some of the breathing and some of the mind body stuff, because like how I think of it, you're gonna laugh when you hear this, because it's only a given. We breathe anyway. And so we might as well learn to use our breathing to be relaxing and calming. 25 years ago, I used to have awful panic attacks, awful. And oh my gosh, my breath rate back then probably would have easily been a resting breath rate, like 25 breaths per minute. And now that'd probably make me hyperventilate. But it was just something that it was just, took me a while to learn how to use the breathing. The very first time I learned how to do it, I closed my eyes and my whole body felt like it was spinning. And I had to do a whole bunch of other relaxation-y type of exercises before I learned how to get a grasp on that. And now I love breathing. It's my favorite. But the beauty of that is that you can take little 1-minute pauses. So during the day, it's less likely to build up. What I used to do before in my parking lot, this is not always safe where I lived out in the middle of the country at that time, is I just sit in my driveway for about 3 or 4 minutes, deep breathe before I went inside. That was my little ritual. One of the things I wanted to mention, a conference I went to, I loved, this person said, they said, we don't always get to see the end results of stuff in our field. They said, I would encourage you to always have a beginning, a middle, and an end activity. And he mentioned that cooking was his. And I loved that idea. I'm not a cook person, although I do love making soups, I discovered. Anything else I absolutely hate with cooking. And so I love it. I can play around with soups and I can make some bizarre, funky stuff. I discovered pear soup is my favorite. And so I make kind of strange things, but there's a beginning, a middle, and an end. And it doesn't always take that long, and it's creative. Find that, whatever that is for you. And I wanted to, you probably saw these. These are little Zentangle, kind of makeshift Zentangle. There is a YouTube little demonstration that says how to do these. I was at a self-care retreat once and they taught us how to do it. They played the YouTube video clip. When we send the PowerPoint out, I'll send out the link for that too, and you can listen to it. The first one was a little frustrating because I have ADHD, and so it was hard for me to stay. I had to seriously listen to it probably 3 times, and then I'm like, I get it. And then I fell in love with it, and I was kind of obsessed with it, and they don't take very long. And so in like, 10, 15 minutes, I'm like a beginning, a middle, end, and it's creative, and it was like soothing. So after you do the first couple of them, if you're perfectionist oriented, you probably do want to wait for a couple of them before you find it relaxing. But I wanted you to try that out. And so you'll see that in the back if you didn't get it, that you make sure you get that. And I would really encourage you to try it out. That really is all that I have. And I just noticed time, we are way over, and that's kind of you because you could have easily bolted. But thank you for being here. Thank you for having me. I do hope something was helpful in some way. If you haven't taken this class, I really encourage you to do, because like in an hour, this is the kind of thing we wish was like a 2-week, and then we'd like go, oh yeah. now you like have all sorts of good information. So we do hope there's still something helpful in an hour time frame. And thank you again for having me. And thank you for those online and the comments that were given. And those of you who are mourning losses, death losses, or others, please know that I will be holding space for you today for those things, and hopefully others will as well. And want to be able to help you honor those losses as well. And that's all.
More food and fill out the